Hi, Jack.
Hi, Jana. Sorry about
There's nothing to be sorry about.
Well, I'm normally prepared, so
Your sense of order is being assaulted?
What's that?
Your sense of order is being assaulted?
Not quite, but certainly deficient compared to standard operating.
You sound pretty serious to me, baby.
Well, I appreciate that. So David, here's Tony, Anthony. Jackie was also.
Hey, all right. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Bonjour.
Anthony, show your mug. Let's see you eating a croissant.
Right?
No, let's miss that part.
All right, let me put my camera on.
Yeah, I'm going outside. It's spectacular sunrise. It's 6 a.m.
Here's Jackie.
Here we go.
Look at Miss Monahan. So I'm giving you a view of our.
Oh, la, 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 la.
Katie's down there on the beach wearing exclusively zinc to avoid the sun. She said, "Do you think I can have any better sunscreen?" And I said, "Yes, stay here.
Oh,
Don't go outside."
There he is. Look at Anthony. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's just beautiful out here.
Yes.
So we're representing all different oceans.
Yeah. I got the bathtub.
Atlantic and almost Caribbean, the Pacific.
A couple of doves just landed there. Yeah, 2 weeks is too long to go without a meeting, I realized. Yeah.
Anthony, how many times a week do we normally talk?
Yeah, but I need the full 3 hour version.
Oh. Well, this may be a little shorter today, but.
And then also too, I wasn't feeling well mentally. I couldn't put my finger on it. Normally I could always tell what I need or what's wrong. But then I felt better all of a sudden today, and I realized because I bought stuff, so I feel bad. It's like that doesn't even count. I just went shopping, and then obviously I'm going to feel better, you know.
You know how you can put your finger on it, Anthony?
Uh-oh.
There it is, pretty much.
There, now you put your finger on it.
Yeah, I did some behavior I was not proud of, and I haven't done that for a long time. And I was like, I felt ashamed, and it's just terrible.
Well, Anthony, that is the topic of this conversation, and talking about it, I think, is very important to mention it at least, and obviously not drown in it.
That's what I realized. It's like you just mentioning it feels so good. I just couldn't wait to get it out. It's like, I put my finger on it. It's just shame, just old behavior, like not growing, just depressing.
Well, and think of those words. You're really identifying the source of the issue. And yet it seems as though it's something we can't otherwise not do, right? As though it's not a choice, as though it just keeps happening to us. It's been happening so long, we take for granted it's normal, but it is abnormal behavior, and it's unnatural and unhealthy, period.
And then part of it was food. I ate too, like I was just having a great time eating what I wanted, thinking I wasn't going to have to pay for it, you know, and then you see it, like I gained weight. I'm like, this is just, then it's like not just mental problem, it's like you see it. And it's in your face. There's not a lot of rationalizing you can do at that point.
Well, you went to the right country to abuse food.
Right? I feel guilty. That's shame, guilt.
You are guilty. You are guilty.
Fat. I feel fat. I feel shame. Yeah, so I need more. We need to talk about that.
We have been. So we lost Jackie again.
Just that feeling like, how do I get it? Like having to talk yourself out of it. That's the part I hate. It's like, you know, you did something wrong. And now you just gotta sit and rationalize it for hours. No, it was okay. It wasn't that bad. You're not gonna do it again. Everybody else does it.
But you're describing all the ways we promote it rather than actually resolve it.
Yeah, and I haven't done that for a while. I guess that was part of the thing too. It was like, damn it, here we are again. How did we get here? How did we end up? How did we get back here?
Well, you thought you were getting away from it rather than recognizing it's always a possibility. And when you do certain things, you're going to feel certain ways. It's not an optional thing. And to think that you can do those things and you won't feel those things is where the insanity becomes.
Yeah,
Like
exactly.
you can think you're doing what you're doing now and shouldn't be doing it is like thinking that it can't be happening. Well, if it's happening, it certainly can be happening, regardless.
And then I did throw in, just to spice everything off, I threw a little comparing myself to other people. That was just like, it was like, wow, this is really now going over flowing over now, you know? And it was all fixed by just buying a couple little things. Everything was okay.
Yeah.
It's so much better. Because I don't have to think about it again, right? And it's like, okay, I can think about this.
Well, apparently I never paused the recording, so we've been at least talking about this in a forum that other people will be able to hear and recognize.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
So that's good. We don't have to retrace the steps for the
the
little preamble we normally do just to say hello and good morning and all that.
Yeah, you're on Florida. That's the way Floridians are.
Speaking of that, it's the fourth month of the year, and since the steps sort of align with the months, it's probably worth mentioning this is fourth step month, and the actual principle of the fourth step is courage. And I would suggest that there is no need to be courageous when we're not discouraging ourselves. And there's nothing more discouraging than thinking thoughts that aren't true or true and having that internal conflict and emotional turmoil that goes on with that fractured state of thinking and all the byproducts that come from that, all the reactive and impulsive and compulsive behaviors that follow. And it includes all of them, not some of them to the exclusion of any others. So typically speaking, when people recover from a compulsion, they generally find that they have other compulsions because the issue isn't in the compulsion. The compulsions are symptomatic effects of the cause. And they're always going to be there. They're not going to be, it's like running into a wall. You're probably going to have some impact when you hit it. Probably pretty assured. And when I say probably, I only leave that to you to determine because I can't tell you that and have you say, yes, it will always happen unless you really, in your own terms, come to terms with that for your own experience. There's nothing I can say or do that's going to make that choice for you ever. So we talk about it to see how we can be better as a group and think about things in broader terms. My experience with the fourth step was that it really introduced me to responsibility and accountability, not as something that I had to take for the things I did, but but for the actual state of being of response able that I am as a human. And in my essence is whatever that essence might be, if it's spiritually based and being bound in the sense that it is absolute, then it is responsible for my potential to even have a human experience. And I don't think of those things as separate, but intrinsically the same. And yet my physical experience is obviously one form of possibility to express a life form or to express life. It's a life form. It's a body, a channel, an opportunity. So the response ability is the ability to respond. What does that mean? It's very different than the ability to react, because the ability to react is a disability. It's reactive, it's defensive, it's defiant, it's denial incarnate, literally. If I'm not having things how they are, I'm going to have a reactive nature because I'm going to be busy defending things as they aren't. And things that aren't, that are only thought of in thought, are delusional. They're illusions being considered to be so real that I can't do anything other than defend them as though they have something to defend. the ultimate freedom in this conversation is seeing that there is nothing to defend when it's only a thought, except the thought thinking that there's something real to defend. So it's what we do presently. And I'm sorry Anthony got disconnected because we were just talking about that
No,
situation.
I'm not disconnected. I just turned off my camera.
Oh, sorry. I don't see you.
And
on
I'm not sorry.
You're with us too, Jackie?
What?
You're with us too? I didn't see
I
you.
am. Yeah,
I thought
I'm
you got
here.
disconnected. Oh, good, good. Well, then, Anthony, to that point we were making, and this point about responsibility, you were saying, why does this keep going on? We've historically treated effects. We've tried to get over things. We've tried to feel better with things. We've tried to get through things. We're constantly thinking those things exist to even think there's something to get over, to feel better than, or to get through. And it's the present thought that's doing that. It's not the thing we did and the history we had and the habits we have and the stories we tell about the things that aren't happening anymore that are plaguing us because we keep redoing it. It's the inability to simply notice that our actual present state is always present. And it isn't filled with any story. There's no narrative in it whatsoever because there's no time in it. If it's always beginning new, there's no end to it. So there's no beginning and end to it. So there's no story. There's no potential for these things that we talk about in our human experience as being true and real, when in fact they're just figments of imagination that we talk about. Those stories we tell always change, always change. Our thoughts are always changing. What is always changing is never the same. So what was it a minute ago, but not what it is now? In some way it's changed, whether it's just distance and time that's impacted it. And I would say time is simply a reflection of change. It doesn't exist outside of change. Time is not an element in the universe where there is no change. So in an absolute sense, if the present is absolute, there is no time here. So there is nothing that we hold dear in terms of our past and history that's any more than what we make of it in the present. And I would
You
suggest
look like the guy from Heaven's Gate right now as you're talking, the way that camera angle is too.
well, there's no comment coming. So, I mean, if there are, we basically are tracking.
Because of what you're kind of talking about too. It sounds like something he would have been saying.
Well, thank you. Given that that was one of the most suicidal events. But the point is that present state, if it is ours, and if you look at your own experience, whether you're listening or you're involved immediately now on this Zoom call, if you start noticing, just noticing this, notice where you are when you're thinking about wondering where you should be or where you think you should be and all that kind of stuff. Notice that you're always where you are. You're always in the present thinking those things as though there's some other place that you could possibly be. Now, I would say, if we really believe there's some other place and really think that's true, and I suspect we have for a long time, that's present traumatic stress disorder. It completely undermines, it doesn't completely, but the thinking that we're doing is so stressed trying to maintain that the anxiety and the stress that comes out of it is what we're guilty for and ashamed of. Why would that be if it were true? It wouldn't be if it were true. If, in fact, that product that we're talking about actually existed in reality and truth, we would be the makers of we would be the creators of reality and truth, and we would be fulfilled and excited and thrilled to be able to have that capacity. But what do we actually create? A very difficult experience, and one that gives us almost constant chronic doubt and uncertainty. And the impossibility of living with that condition because it's an insane thought means the only way to get rid of it is to try to pretend everybody else is sick and I'm healthy. And what I need to do is feel better than them. And what I need to do is have more than them. And what I need to do is get over them. And what I need to do is stay away from them. And what am I fighting for? Isolation, independence, not dependence, not reliance, not unity, not wholeness, not fullness. I'm fighting for the exact same thing I claim to be trying to escape. And I'm trying to escape from the same thing that I claim to be trying to find. What am I trying to escape from? Reality and truth. If it's already here, where is the fault? In my thinking. Why do I think I need to blame people and fault them? because I can't, and I'm not willing to be responsible for what I'm creating and doing to my own experience.
Yes.
That thing we call self is a product of imagination, for the most part. If we have a self that's really true, then we all share that same self and that same I. That I becomes united and common and healthy and normal, rather than abnormal and unhealthy and diseased and distinct and distinguishable. Those are all terms of trying to make believe that I'm alone in the universe and that nothing is out there that's going to make any difference to me. Nothing. Everything's against me because I've chosen to fight reality and truth.
Or the opposite, that everyone else is doing it wrong and you're doing it right, that like your side of the street's clean, but that guy's got it all fucked up. But if someone's got it all fucked up, I've got it all fucked up.
Well, the point of that, though, Jana, is it's interesting how sure we can be about what's wrong with everyone else while we're actually creating the wrong that gives us the impression that making everyone else wrong makes us right.
Exactly. That's what I'm thinking about, this whole responsibility thing. And it seems like such a huge gift to just give up all those minor grievances and all my resentments and go, you know what, if they're hurting, I'm hurting. Let's raise the vibe for everybody cumulatively.
Well, but there's a difference in trying to raise the vibe of something based on a lie and based on delusion than there is in starting to see that there is no vibe in something that's absolute. It's just an absolute state of, there's probably no vibration in it at all because it's not it's not the same thing. We talk about energy because it's in this universe. What would be beyond the universe?
Neutrality.
What would be something that doesn't include the universe in terms of time and space in the realm of this universe? This universe is small compared to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And yet it's vast within the potential of our own potential to experience it as something that we're actually a part of and never have been apart from as humans. We're very much a part of it. We rely on its flawless operations to even exist, to have this phone call or this Zoom call and conversation. We rely on it almost without doubt, and then cause doubt by wondering whether we belong here or wondering if it's our true self, and wondering, questioning, wondering why we're in doubt all the time, constantly questioning more and more and more and more, rather than what's certain. Well, what's certain is that we're all here now. And what's certain is that everything happening right now is happening right now. And that means you and I and us and we are all connected to everything. And if everything isn't enough, we're never going to get more because there isn't any more. We can't have less because that's how much there is. It isn't a debate over more or less. It's just a simple concession that that's how it is. That's the natural state of our being. And the fact that we can think otherwise places the fault and the blame on the thinking, nothing shy of that. It's only what we think that's causing these issues, these other issues that we would like to think that we can get rid of by blaming and shaming and faulting others and other things. We even talk about God as not listening to our prayer. I'm waiting for God to answer my prayer, like God's on vacation. Like God is a human. God's a boss. He's out of the office. I got to wait for him to be in the office. We think of him as a him. He's a man. He comes and goes. He does exactly what humans do. So we use him exactly as we use other humans and don't even know what the true nature of God is by simply conceding. It isn't something that comes and goes. It doesn't have a body to come and go in. It doesn't have a brain to think with. It doesn't have a self to be at odds with, or to feel self-conscious over, or to be offended by, or feel criticized by, or angry over. Pure consciousness is not dealing in the realm that we think of. And since we think so much of our thinking, we think all there is more thinking throughout the whole universe because we see it as a self-centered extension of what we make believe is truth and reality. It is not true and it is not real. It's simply a fig leaf of imagination or a figment of imagination. John is coming in. He just got back from Tokyo. Welcome home.
Yes, sir.
Sorry you missed the very beginning, but I think you might want to re-listen because I think some of these points are things that you and I have been covering, and Anthony brought them up, and the recording was started early, so we didn't have to rehash it. It was kind of, it just came out naturally, as it tends to. But welcome, John. I'm glad to see you.
Well, glad to see you.
Jackie's here and Anthony's here too. I don't know if you can see. I don't see them on my laptop, but I'm told
Hi, maniacs.
there. Oh, there's Jackie. I see.
What's
Oh, so
up, John?
Smoking hot, Jackie. How are you, lovey?
Oh, yeah. You know it.
That's right, baby.
So
There's the big guy.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
Dave-
How you doing?
David got to bed about 40 minutes ago from work, so he's up.
Oh,
He
The
got a
big
good.
guy. Big guys can't complain.
you got a cat nap and now you're back.
Yeah.
So, Jana, to your point, if we're trying to raise everyone else's vibe because everyone else's vibe is low, we're trying to feed the thinking that's always going to be the thing we feel guilty and shameful and faulting.
Not everybody else's, I mean ours cumulatively. All of us. I'm not saying them and me. I'm saying we're all one. Just to keep
Yeah.
my shit straight so that if I stay in neutrality and I stay out of my judgment and I let things be as they are, I feel like that in itself is just raising the vibe for me.
I got it.
It took
But
a
you-
really long time to have a quiet enough mind to get used to the neutrality, and thank the universe for you, because you got that. You helped me with that hurdle of not wanting a parade all the time.
Right. Well, let's say, given that you've seen that now, because
Mhm.
as far as I'm concerned, I've got sort of a broom and I'm just cleaning up
Yeah.
anything I hear.
Yeah.
Let's say that state's all of our natural state. When you're talking about everyone, let's look at everyone and talk about the whole of everything. And
Yeah.
let's say that if the absolute is the absolute state, that would be a natural state of neutrality, right? It wouldn't be taking position. Like I was just saying, God isn't more or less. A
Mhm.
spiritual being can't be more or less because it's not dealing in spatial dynamics. It's not dealing in space and time. It's dealing in an absolute state of knowing.
Mhm.
So that would ultimately be neutrality, because it's even so much neutrality that there's nothing to even choose in that, because everything's already been chosen. Everything exists. It's the fullness of it's a consciousness that's completely the source of everything that even has an atom attached to it. In the smallest sense, what we think is the smallest sense, that's connected to the ultimate in all sense. So if that's the premise, then that would also be our premise. So our nature, that's our nature. If that's our nature, then if we're trying to raise the vibe, we're trying to raise it because we're recognizing it's lower. If the vibe is lower, it's what we're doing with our thinking, because it can't be lower in reality. It can only be lower in the thinking we're doing. So we need to now overcome that lower vibe with a higher vibe. And largely, that's what humanity has been learning to do through history. Try to feel better about what's wrong, rather than begin to concede that if there's anything, if the universe is already operating on a perfect harmonic, and it's, by the way, it's not always harmonic. It goes into it's constantly varying. It's seeking harmony, but it's not always in harmony. There's always transitions going on around us constantly, but they're natural. They're not upset and depressed in that interim period. They're just going through a process.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. So there's no thinking in it. We are effectively, as far as I can tell, uniquely qualified to think the way that we do. Animals think too. If you watch that thing on the octopus on Netflix, it's pretty revealing that this guy who lived with this thing for a year said he just became astounded by how much information that thing was digesting. The octopus.
My octopus teacher.
Yeah.
Yes, that was precious.
Now think about what he said. He was startled to see how this thing began to actually think just like he did. It had a sense of knowing well beyond what anybody would say. Well, octopus are brilliant. If you've ever eaten octopus, they are really smart. We tend to talk about how they're prepared, not how they live.
Right.
And where they came from.
Yeah. And the fact is, if that knowing nature is that leaves have that, They just don't talk about it. They don't tell us about it. They don't brag about it. It's just the nature of nature. So if that's happening and that's our basis, then it isn't anything we ever think about, and it's nothing we can overcome, and it's nothing we can improve or diminish. So the only thing that's happening in our thinking is the thinking about our thinking that's causing an impression that becomes depressing the longer we maintain it. And the question Anthony had for John recently in a conversation that we had with David, and I think it was David and John and Anthony, maybe it was last week, week before.
Yeah.
But, Anthony said, do you have obsessive thoughts? That's typically a clue that something it's like a computer that's got that's malfunctioning and it's trying to reboot itself, and it just goes in circles and circles and circles because it's getting garbage in, it's producing garbage. So it can't start up, it can't get out of that cycle. And if we're witnessing that in our own experience, it's a concession that we're doing that thing even below the surface of our thinking. We're doing it because it's happening and we're witnessing that. That's enough as a starting point to say, yes, I have that happen. And if I have that happen, I must be doing something beneath that is wrong. And what would be wrong? Thinking thoughts are truth and reality, thinking that who I am is only what I think, thinking that all that should ever happen is what I thought should happen, thinking that everyone else is to blame when I don't get what I want, like I'm a 3-year-old who isn't getting the right kind of ice cream because his parents just don't happen to have it, and I'm stomping my feet demanding I want more, which is not uncommon with 3-year-olds. And it's not out
Or
of
with Anthony.
Jackie. I want mint chip.
Although the 3-year-olds rehearsed it because they learned it from their parents.
Well, it comes in concert with learning that if they whine, they get, because the parent doesn't want to have to learn that. But think of that as an internal experience. We do that with our own experience of who we think we are. We become we become demoralized in our own experience. What is demoralizing? Immoral. We're demoralizing our own experience in the idea that somehow self-pity is going to get us somewhere. That if we're really pitiful and we're really debased and we're really sad, we're going to get a lot of attention from people, and that's going to make up for this condition that we are causing, we are experiencing, we are creating, and we are demanding. Go ahead, John.
So what happens is that we, as little kids, are all happy. And then we practice being unhappy for whatever the reasons that we can imitate from our parents. And then we become unhappy. We go in the mirror and we look at ourselves and we go, I hate this and I hate that and I hate this, in imitation. And so that we can find a way to be unhappy.
Yeah, everybody's waiting to be insulted, that seems like.
Let me tell you, I don't think any of us, having been in an environment that was warm, almost completely silent, didn't require breathing, was almost completely weightless, were happy going through that tiny channel that forced us into cold air, separation from mom, had to breathe, start to eat, things got noisy. My sense is the actual experience of birth alone is probably as traumatic as anything we ever experience, and it impacts our entire body. It almost lights it up in a way that none of that happened within the womb, unless somebody was punching the mother or violently invading her body in some way. So I know that we've got all sorts of stories as to why it happens, and I'm sure that they're all stories worthy of telling in relation to the thinking we have. But whether or not it makes the ultimate difference and fixes it, my sense is it just continues to put a new layer over it of, yeah, we understand what's wrong, and it's somewhere back there that other time, but not now, rather than say, like Anthony.
So you never practiced in the mirror acting angry?
When I was a kid?
Yeah, when you were little.
No, I just got angry and I stamped my feet, and I had explosive.
So let's ask everybody.
I grew up in Venice. You didn't get an audience. If you wouldn't get angry because it would get you absolutely nowhere. You just did your own thing. I can't imagine throwing a fit expecting a result. Nobody was watching. Nobody
But do you
cared.
see, do you see how good we are at taking our attention off of what we're doing here now? This is the only place there is. There's nothing else happening but stories about a past that don't exist anymore.
Right.
And if there is a possibility of actually growing up, and I mean growing up in a sense of not maintaining the sort of laborious anchors of this seeming past that seem to condemn us because of the stories we tell about it, that we continue to refine and get votes for also. Well, everybody else thinks this, it must be true. Well, there's an adage in lying that if you lie long enough, it becomes true. That isn't true. A lie doesn't become true because people believe in it. Truth doesn't even require belief for it to be true. It's always been true.
And even if you convince somebody of some stupid story, how is it even relevant to the here and now?
Well, it's relevant in the chaos it creates and the idea that you've talked about this as much as anyone, Jana. You create that conspiracy of dunces, where the confederacy of dunces, where everybody who also believes in it all of a sudden becomes an ally. And what are they an ally in? Insanity.
And the illusion, an ally in the illusion that I've created because I want attention, because it's for me. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what I was doing was being honest in the moment about how it happened for me.
Yes. Well, and I would also say, John, that ultimately that's an opinion that's probably changed over the years and probably really doesn't reflect exactly what happened. But before you got on, one of the points I made is that we're so ill conditioned to actually confront what's happening now as it's happening and talk about it as it's happening now, that we're constantly pulling from this imagined past and this imagined future to even have something to talk about, rather than just say, I still feel confounded over just being still, being quiet, being aware of what's happening in my own bodily system, the nervousness, the obsessive thoughts, whatever it is, just talk about that and say, yeah, I can feel very shut down. You know what I find? The more people I talk to, the more shut down I get.
Why is that?
I'm used to a certain number of people, so I've gotten used to managing those things and thinking that I'm in control. And when there's 200 people looking at me, I seem to get the pressure of that moment seems to conflict a little bit. And so I don't feel as clear. I don't feel as flexible. It tells me that I have a lot going on about how people see me and still think of me.
Well, there's some comfort in us being your co-conspirators because it's familiar. We've done, right?
Yes. Yeah, you're right. That's absolutely.
Like everyone here right now, all of us are co-conspirators because we've all had this dialogue for enough to be familiar with one another and to be comfortable in it. And I totally feel the love. I love this meeting.
Well, and part of this is also realizing that the dynamic here is to say what we think rather than what we think should be said.
Exactly.
Very different, because all of those other things that are not in the present are always about should. Well, if it had been this way, it wouldn't be this way now. Well, that's interesting that we'd have so much brilliant clarity about a moment that isn't even happening, but don't have any clarity about the moment that is. If that thing that back then didn't happen, I'd be much better now. Oh, really?
Yeah, this moment would be different than it is.
I guess that's why it's fun to think
we're
about
masters of imagining what isn't happening is going to cure us, while we're masters of imagining what is happening has nothing to do with us.
And that's why it's fun to think about the future.
Right?
I'm sorry,
the future.
Jenna.
Go ahead, Jenna.
If only I'd done left instead of right.
Well, but that lesser more thing is always what thinking does. Thinking's always comparing and contrasting. That's its job. It doesn't mean it isn't supposed to be doing that. It means that when we think it's reality and truth, we think reality does the same thing, comes and goes, is more or less, sometimes and not other times. That's not true. It can't be true if truth is true. The thing about truth, if it's true, is that it's always true. It isn't something that's debatable and all of a sudden be, oh, right, well, God's a liar. That's it for God. We're voting a new God in. We need a new truth and a new
And you
reality.
need co-conspirators to have a vote.
Well, he's got a lot of them down here and it doesn't seem to be working.
At all.
Think about all the ideas we have about God and how God comes and goes. But for the grace of God, there go I. I apparently have grace, but that guy over there has none. He got off the train tracks, man. And
I'm going to make it. He's not. He's going to burn in hell, and I'm going to just be raised up.
Yeah.
That's the weirdest philosophy. That's a huge definition of separation.
Well, so amongst us, if we've gotten comfort, if we've gotten comfortable as a dynamic, it's the same kind of comfort we develop in our own experience with ourselves that we're constantly trying to manage by doing the right thing all the time, so we don't have these inner explosions and really reveal to somebody how pent up we really are, how upset we really are, where we have a nervous breakdown and just start crying in the middle of a meeting or something. It's not something we tend to want to do, and yet most of us have that kind of rage built up, and many of us, I would suggest, have that kind of rage and upset in us that we've learned to manage and pretend isn't even there.
What if it's that level of joy instead of rage? You just cry because you just can't even believe the amazingness of it all.
Well, I would say that is the difference between pity and awe. And nature, when we're really witnessing it, there's a sort of melting that happens rather than a pitiful attempt to make believe that our pity, like John was talking about, is going to get us some bonuses, some prizes.
I just remember when that responsibility thing kicked in, I was crying all the time and texting you, "Wah!" But it was all in awe. It was all just good.
Well, if that's the natural state, our expression of that would be to be awed by what's happening rather than think of it in terms of what should or shouldn't be happening. How could what's happening not be happening? Think of this. We think what's happening shouldn't be happening. That means we think it's possible that what's happening can't be happening. Well, how could it not be happening while it's happening if it's actually happening? I mean, that alone is an indication that we've got something bent in the thinking process.
Or that thought that if we had done something differently, that it wouldn't be happening like it's happening right now. That's even weirder for us to waste time on that. Like if I'd gone left instead of right, then maybe whatever the fuck would be different than it is when it is what it is.
But if we have those thoughts at all, to try and chase them away because they're weird and they're wrong and all that is to miss the fact that there's some element in us still living that lie, still acting in that way, still thinking that way, because thinking is a primary action, which is giving us an indication that somehow thinking will finally resolve it one day, that my life depends on my thinking. And to the human body, my life does depend on my thinking. But it certainly doesn't depend on delusional thinking, because delusional thinking undermines my body's ability to function. It doesn't help my body. It actually, through stress and anxiety and all those things, ends up minimizing and diminishing the capacity, disintegrating, literally trying to take it apart. The integral nature of my body becomes taken apart by this diseased function of pressure and stress and anxiety. Undermines all of my bodily systems that are designed to heal and help heal and correct. So if we do anything here, honesty would be at the heart of it. And the fourth step is really about responsibility, the ability to respond, and accountability. And a good accountant, if the books don't balance, is not a good accountant. Something's wrong. So our job is to do our best to be honest and simply talk about things as we see them, even if it's wrong. Talking about a wrong thought openly is being honest. We do not need to be right to be honest. Expressing what's actually happening is enough, because it's freeing to begin to realize that it's perfectly okay to say the wrong thing and get it out of our head and share it. And there's nobody out there that's ever going to be hurt by it, and there's nobody out there that's going to hurt us with it.
Oh, that's beautiful. You just gave us permission. That was beautiful, Jack.
Well, thank you, Jana.
And rare.
Yes.
But I know that John isn't saying that lightly as a joke.
No.
No, well, that's good.
I
Listen,
felt that in my chest when you said it. I could feel it in my chest.
Me too. It's called agita.
What is it?
Agita. It's an
Isn't that
Italian word.
angina? Isn't that angina just before a heart attack?
No, agita. It's indigestion.
Inner.
John's uncomfortable.
Oh,
John's uncomfortable with our intimacy, Jack. He keeps making jokes every time we say something. What's up, John?
Jack does that all the time. He makes jokes.
We're talking about you now. What's the deal?
Yeah, but how do you know what I feel?
What's
Yeah,
that?
he's practicing.
How do you know I'm uncomfortable?
Because every time we say something, you make a joke about it.
Yeah, but I'm enjoying myself.
Have fun.
A lot of what John says, I don't see as a joke. I see that he's actually starting to say things that are, and he generally is very honest anyhow, but I do see that some of those things are somewhat pertinent and maybe the things that are uncomfortable for others to hear, because you've been almost exclusively someone who has pointed at me things that you see to bring them to my attention and give me that perspective, which I appreciate. And I probably go a certain distance to try to deflect that stuff because I've never been particularly fond of being the center of attention unless it was the kind of attention I was fond of being the center of. So I think some of that stuff is accurate. And my sense is some of the jokes we couch as jokes because we're afraid they might be hurtful or caustic or create an eruption, and we can back out of it if it does by saying, oh, I was only kidding. I didn't mean that. But I don't, John has never been the type of person that tends to throw out, dark humor maybe, but.
And also not back out.
Yeah. But, my sense is we all do little bits of what everybody does, and the fact that we don't do them as well or more as someone else does doesn't mean that we're not doing them. That doesn't mean that we're not covering our ass and trying to come up with some kind of a deflective potential to be seen as better than the thing we just did or said might seem or reveal. And it's okay to be honest. Like David saying he's basically not awake.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see his eyes.
Yeah, I'm hanging on by a thread, to be honest.
So the potential to be able to spend a couple of hours with people and talk honestly about what we're doing allows, as far as I can tell, and if you need permission, I'm not sure I can give it to you, but I could suggest that your own recognition of the responsibility that we have is the beginning of seeing that it's up to each of us to come to terms with whatever we're going to decide to do. It's not my words, it's not your words. It's what we do collectively with perspective that generally offers the best chance to see ourselves honestly enough to recognize that we each make the decision and the choice whether or not we're going to be involved and play a responsible game or opt out and begin to try to hedge and manipulate it in some way for our own seeming gain that has not gained humanity any kind of seeming abundance. It's been a fight for scarcity more than actual abundance. And I would say that effort is always going to implode because it's backward. It doesn't have any potential. Anything that is focused on a center is eventually going to stop. And anything focused on expanding from that center, it goes on forever. And while I don't think forever ever comes, so there really is no such thing, that present state now is that foreverness, is that everness. That nowness is where we are. It is what we have. It is where choices are made. It's where everything that's ever happened has happened. It's where every thought has ever thought has happened that led to anything that ever happened as a result of it. And if we share that constantly, then it really is a very different dynamic than something that happened then and is going to happen there and is going to happen then again some other time, because it's always happening now. It's always happening now. It's always where we are. And that ultimately is responsibility. Why? Because that's where my ability to respond is possible. So, Anthony, if you wonder how to stop something, the real question is, why do I continue to restart this? Why do I continue to go down that path and think it's going to be different? And I would suggest to you that you really think your thoughts are one day going to save you. You still think they're true. You still think they're reality. You can think you don't, but if you watch how you operate, you will see clearly what the effects are telling you if you're willing to listen to the effects as a guidance system, because they're immediately consequential to the thinking you're doing. Those effects are not accidents. And it doesn't take a night or a day to have a hangover for the decisions we make. It happens immediately, but we want that gratification to last, and it never does.
Exactly.
It lasts for about as long as it takes to get the thing done before we say, oh, I know where this is heading. And it isn't even heading there. It's already there. It's happened when you had the thought to begin with. And when you start seeing the impulsiveness, you're operating off of reactiveness, and it's going to lead to compulsiveness every time. And to think it won't is like thinking if you throw a ball against a wall, it shouldn't bounce back, and you're going to stand there and throw it until it finally does. And that's going to be your whole life, throwing that ball against that wall and thinking someday this is going to stop. It's got to stop. If I told you that, like I just did, you would think that's crazy. That's just stupid. That's even a stupid analogy. And you're right. It's really stupid. Now apply that to what we've been doing in our own lives. And it starts to make a point of how stupid and idiotic and insane it is to think the repetition of something that has never worked will one day all of a sudden miraculously work. In nature, if something even has a thread of reality in it, when you apply it, you will see something come out of it that's actually beneficial. You'll get feedback like they do in laboratories. They get a little bit of an indication that they're on a track that's leading to something. There's some indication that some part of it, some thread of it is in fact real. It's in fact accurate enough to be reliable.
It's that old I'm up to something though, right? I mean, it's the
Well, it's beginning to really concede that if this problem is the problem and we have a disease that's a mental illness. It's literally a mental illness. And to think of it as any less than that is to try to talk our way out of it, because the idea of admitting we're insane to that degree is kind of difficult. It's the same stigma I struggled with when I realized I was an alcoholic. I thought, well, that wasn't the goal when I left high school. That wasn't what I looked forward to in my life, to be an alcoholic. But what came with that was a freedom to start looking at life in a way that I had never bothered to look at it. And I began to realize that everything I did wrong was always trying to achieve that goal. I was always trying to get there in all these dysfunctional ways and never was able to get there, and finally got there by surrendering the fact that the dysfunction and the defect is in fact the freedom to start to see the nature of something that was never gone. I was just preoccupied looking at my thinking and thinking about my thinking and thinking more about my thinking and thinking that if I thought more or less about it, that would be the fix. It's the same thing the book talks about in the big book about mixing drinks. We tried every kind of combination. For me, it was mixing drinks and drugs. I knew what the drink was that I liked, but the drugs, even though that changed slightly, but the drugs were constantly a cocktail to see how I could mix and use in more or less terms to try and make believe that somehow I'd get it under control. And it was always out of control. It's the same with the thinking. As long as I make believe that thinking one day is going to be true, I'm going to continue to rely on it. I'm going to continue to act like it. And I'm going to continue to dysfunction under the weight of it and wonder why I'm depressed and be pretty sure that it has nothing to do with me. Because it would be insane to admit. It's just like going to an insane asylum. If you say I'm checking myself in because I'm insane, they'd say, well, you're sane enough to recognize you're insane, so you don't belong here. Because the real definition of insanity is not seeing that you're doing it. If we're doing this stuff and not even seeing it, that qualifies us. And if we need to look at the effects and start noticing that it's not in the thinking about it that's going to judge whether or not we're doing it, it's in the effects that we're witnessing accurately and honestly, you'll start to see, Anthony, that those impulses will start to fade because you're looking at it accurately, you're looking at it honestly, and that is not insane to do at all. It's actually the application of sanity starting to being brought in, and there's no darkness that can ever fight the light, ever.
What does that mean, Jack?
If you turn on a light, the darkness disappears. Doesn't matter how dark.
No darkness can fight the light.
Go into a dark room and turn the light on and see if the darkness ever wins. And yet we use that same concept of the fact that we can't, they're calling dark matter because it can't be seen, right? So they're calling things that can't be seen dark. Well, when we think we don't see them in understanding, because understanding is another form of seeing for humans, right? My visual seeing is one form, but the other form is I don't see what you're saying. I can see that. We're talking about understanding. If my understanding is seeing something that isn't there, it's just a hallucination. It's literally an illusion thought to be real. And delusion is the basis. My understanding is insane because I'm actually engaging with something in my own thinking that doesn't even exist. It has no substance. There is no light in it whatsoever. And what do I get? Dark moods. People say, I feel really dark. I feel like a cloud's hanging over my head. We talk about it in metaphoric terms and don't realize, oh, those are the blocks that we're talking about in the steps, for instance. They're not real blocks. They're self-imposed, self-induced states of experience that we create, all in thinking.
So in thinking of trying to understand someone's insanity,
You're
is
insane.
my insanity.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why, interestingly and beautifully, as far as I can see, Bill recognized that you can't diagnose anybody. Now, think about that, Jenna, in relation to responsibility. If I can't diagnose anybody, then you can't come to me for a cure because the cure is with you, with each individual. Isn't that nice? Just like in engineering, each piece of the puzzle, as it's built, bears its own responsibility for the overall strength of that building or whatever it is that's being constructed. Each piece, you start taking pieces out and the whole thing starts to get wobbly and fall apart. Little pieces have catastrophic impact on the whole. When we're engaging with ideas that are untrue, that we think are true, our entire structure, our entire functional capacity as beings isn't threatened, but our entire human capacity and the expression of that knowing nature is incapacitated and disabled to some degree. And to think of mental health as only people who are psychotic, I mean, if we're making believe of something that isn't true is true, that's a psychotic thought. Doesn't mean I am psychotic. It means I am entertaining thoughts that are psychotic. How well is that going to do in my overall system when I think I have control over that? I have no control over it because there's nothing to control. Being out of control, literally in this sense, means there's nothing to control. It's literally a delusion. It's literally a thought I'm maintaining now about something that doesn't exist that's causing that impact. And it's never anything other than that. It isn't somewhere else, sometime else. It's no part of my previous history because my body is a reflection of all the stress I've ever created and imposed on it. And if I continue to impose more on it, I am not helping relieve my body. I am helping it maintain that tension right now, rather than start to actually allow it to fall apart and unravel and undo. So what do I want typically for that kind of thinking? More credit. Why? Because it's not due. I'm not due credit for doing something that has no basis, that hurts people and myself, my own experience. What have humans done largely? Say that they discovered things in nature just so they could take credit for it. They didn't discover it. They just figured out how to utilize it. Came to terms with it. It was always there. It was always available. It was always ready. In some way, it was always ready, whether it evolved or developed, as much has been processed through the universe. The gases and the combination of the things that have happened in heat have developed the elements that we deal with today. They didn't exist prior to that conversion. But the potential for them existed, and the potential for us to operate on a basis that is free of the interference that we impose on undermine our bodies exists right now and always has. In entirety, not in some small part, not in some creep along kind of way, or in any creepy way at all. In an absolute sense, as quickly as this. And it's all just based on a willingness to notice that if an absolute state of being is an absolute state of being, it has always been our state of being. And to begin to rely on that as a basis of our existence, rather than the questions we ask about why we can't get there, because those questions asking why we can't get there and somehow I need to seek and find it are all suggesting we're not there. So the more I look in that regard, the more I'm denying that it's here. Now, what am I getting better at? What's worse? What do I need to feel better about what's worse? That's not healthy. That's actually addiction again, parading as health. There's a $10 billion self-help industry out there helping people feel better about what's wrong. And I'm not suggesting you can't feel better. But if we can feel better, it shows how flexible that seeming problem that seems so intractable and seems so impossible is. It's as thinly veiled as anything we do with it productively all of a sudden has us feel better about it. It's an indication of how flexible that stuff is. It's not intrinsic. It's not inherent. It is not absolute in any way, except for it is absolutely not real. It's just not real.
The only thing that's ever made me so, like, as we say, feel better was responsibility. That's the only thing that's given me my reason for being.
Well, consider the thing that your being is responsible, and it's a part of if it's a part of an absolute state of consciousness that allows this life, this universe to even exist, and it's responsible for that, then that's the nature of our existence, is responsibility. And what you may remember, Jana, in the more early announcements, responsibility, freedom, and choice are the triangle of mental freedom, of mental health. So responsibility is not reactivity where I'm repeatedly getting better at just basically bouncing the ball off the wall and thinking because I'm getting better at bouncing the ball off the wall, someday it won't bounce. I'm getting better at feeling better. I'm getting better at getting over it. I'm getting better at getting through it. I've got the way, they say the way out is through. Well, if there's nothing there, there's no way out. And there's no way in. To start seeing that is to start saying, oh my, I've lived my whole life thinking that there was something there because I thought something was there. That's just another thought I'm having about another thought I think I'm having.
Knowing it's like a resting is the neutrality thing. It's the lack of a parade, and it's the somehow ability to be able, that knowing and the responsibility can let me rest.
Well, I'm going to read that page for you because it is one of my favorite pages, and I think it's quintessential to this conversation.
Good, thank you.
And it's the top of page 85, bottom of 84, 85. And it's very interesting how this aligns. It says, and we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. For by this time, sanity will have returned. What was the insane idea? I can drink and use. So there's the pinprick to the, you can pop a balloon with a pin, but you can't with a bat. That's the pinprick of freedom from insanity. I'm not going to pick up the drink. I'm not going to start again, Anthony. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. A hot flame burns. We know that it's going to burn us. We can think it's not going to burn us, and it's going to still burn us. What's interesting about alcohol is it makes us feel better about being burned.
Oh, Yeah.
This is the difference with an allergy, with alcohol and drugs and any compulsion. They give us temporary relief for a second, but they are condemning us to it's a suicidal tendency, because in little tiny micro doses, we're getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and not even noticing it. Just like people who are newly sober very often don't notice how much progress they've made, because they're starting to feel how deeply emotional they actually are and deeply depressed they are and how angry they've been and how frustrated they've been. And all of a sudden they're starting to actually witness that stuff they had kept from their own experience through numbing themselves for decades or whatever the period of time was. So next page, now top of 85.
Yeah.
We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. Think of that. It's not a thinking thing.
Yeah.
We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. Freedom. There's nothing there to do but simply be honest about the case and of our situation, the facts of our situation. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality. We're not even taking us to that place. We feel as though we've just been placed there. Why? Because there's a greater guiding source than our thinking. We finally notice that there is something guiding life that is incredibly profound, and we are a part of it. We're witnessing it.
And how does it make us feel?
Safe and protected.
That's it. So beautiful.
Yes. We feel that we're taken care of. All of a sudden, we're realizing this had nothing to do with my thinking at all. So again, to our conversation, this isn't about doing anything to get there. It's about recognizing we're there. It's already here. We have not sworn off. The problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. What in reality, whatever exists, exists. In illusion, nothing really exists because it's simply an illusion. So delusions certainly don't exist because we think they're real, because they're illusions being imagined to be real. It does not exist for us. Reality continues to exist. It doesn't get any more or less. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. Fear is gone. That is our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit conditions. So he's talking about reaction in a way that he's actually turned it into response. That's how we react as long as we stay in fit spiritual condition, because we're in a place of neutrality. That's what recovery is about. Recovery isn't about, I'm never going to drink again. I'm never going to have another drink. I'm never going to do it. I'm never going. It's about what am I going to do now, today? One day at a time. Why? Because days are where life happens every day. Not tomorrow isn't happening today, and yesterday isn't happening today. Today is happening today. And more than that, now is happening all the time today, because that's where things happen. This is where it starts. What do I do now? Pick up the thought? Do I think I'm going to go out on that quest and find it, or begin to realize I've already got it? It's here. I've already got it, and I've been mastering the art of making believe I don't, and making believe it's up to my belief and my hope and my faith to get it. And I need to have more faith. I don't have enough faith. That's why I don't have it. As though God said, you know what? I'm going to leave you on earth with an empty gas tank, and if you don't fill it, you are fucked. That's a pretty horrifying prospect. How can an infinite source give and take? How can an infinite source not be neutral? It can't take a position because it doesn't even exist in the realm of space and time, where dimensional things are about positions and opposites happen. And even in opposites, they're connected. Opposites attract because they're not apart. We take positions in the spectrum between the extremes, and we think that position happens to be true because we've taken it. And what does it do? It puts us at odds with everything else on that spectrum, which means it unites us with everything else on that spectrum, which goes without notice. When we make believe we're going to fight for that position. It tain't true. Some of us locally in LA are going to start having an in-person meeting. And I think Jackie may be involved, Gabe, Laura Alice.
Oh, yeah.
And part of the focus, two parts I'd like to see, is to figure out what some of the key points are that could be presented simpler than I ever present them, but key transitional points like yours about, Jana, the responsibility, and Mike, who said that, MK, who said that it's only a thought, like when he just started realizing that and started having the obsessive thinking during the day and said, well, it's only a thought. It's only a thought. It's only a thought. He would diffuse it because that's actually what it is. So if you align your thinking with what's happening, there's no pressure, there's no anxiety, there's no stress, there's no opposition, there's no fight. So it starts to become a little more obvious that there's freedom there. It isn't because there was no freedom, it's because we thought there was no freedom. And we thought thinking was so pervasive and so substantial and so much reality that we thought we could actually undo reality and oppose reality and wouldn't have any impact, when in fact it would be opposing our own life, and we're fighting for non-existence and being alone and all those things which are scary, and we know it, we feel it. But that was another one of the tidbits that came up, and I know there's been others. I'm not really great at tracking them, and I would like to start doing that so we can create an outline and something for people to look at. Opposites is another one, just noticing that opposites are actually connected. They're never disconnected. And what's interesting in an absolute source is that the opposite of the absolute is absolute. The opposite of infinite is infinite. So it confirms that there's no thinking in that, because thinking's a process of change. And knowing doesn't need to think. It already knows everything if it's absolute. All knowing or all omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, those aren't things that are in time and space. So they are all for all and everything for everything all the time. I think David went to bed.
Oh, sweet dreams, David. Hard work.
Yeah, he left.
So if we have a job together, it's to start to share what we think and see, regardless of whether we think it would be welcomed or kind or nice or whatever. Very often truth is or honesty is thought to be brutal, when in fact it's the brutality of the person that we're speaking to that is generally unveiled by it. And the observations are often accurate and probably would be helpful if someone was interested in actually listening, because nobody has a greater impact on our experience than our own thinking. There's nobody than this idea of a self inside of us that we fight with and are constantly in turmoil over, that is going to ever be close. Nobody outside of us is ever going to be close to the kind of trauma we create in our own experience. And when that trauma is taken away, people do not seem to be a threat any longer, because all they're doing is sharing thoughts, and it's easy to hear thoughts. And I have a whole list of things we do now, like pin the tail on the donkey is fault and blame, and leapfrog is trying to get over something or trying to feel better about it. And peekaboo's thinking that if we don't see it, it's not there. And pin the tail on the donkey, I think I said. But I forgot where I was starting, but sticks and stones will break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Remember that in elementary school?
Yeah.
But think of today. Sticks and stones can break my bones, which is pretty obvious. Words can never hurt me. Think of what people are arguing over today. They're arguing over people's words. What does that mean? We're arguing over thoughts. We're trying to police each other's thoughts over the idea that our thoughts are so strong and powerful, so real, that other people better respect them or they're in trouble. And to not notice that for us to need all those other people to think like we do means our thoughts are in great peril and jeopardy and fear and insecurity and vulnerable, because they're weak. They're just simply thoughts we're having that we think are real and true, and now we think everybody else should think like us, or we're in peril. Honesty is not brutal, but it reveals very often the brutality of the person who feels it is. And it isn't not helpful to do that, it's not helpful to do that and then tell them you're sorry and walk away and leave them in that brutality. Rather than say, if it's happening and you don't even see it, I'm still willing to be your friend, to be with you, to hang with you, as maybe you do come to terms with it. I certainly could be wrong. I'm simply sharing a thought. It's something I've sensed many times, and to open a dialogue that could be extraordinarily helpful. And what most people don't tend to get, my experience, and I don't know how to speak to most people, but within my experience, is when something goes wrong, they don't get people staying around long enough to get to the other side to be able to see what's right. People break off relationships, they disappear, they say thank you or fuck you and walk away. I don't want to deal with that anymore. I can't be in there. I can't do this anymore. Rather than say, you know what, we probably could. Might be worth hanging in long enough. I know a lot of people I work with are not interested in hearing what I have to say most of the time. But what I've learned is to hang tight and watch what happens. And they come back and things change and develop. And it's been incredibly insightful for me because I realized that I had very little faith in other people and still do. As a result of the lack of faith I have with that self that I think I am, I have very little faith in others. Rightfully so in relation to that thinking, but not rightfully so in relation to my absolute knowing nature. And John, I think some of the things you've helped me see is that I can sound confident while actually being defensive.
You know, I just got back from Japan, and something you said that Bob or Bill or Biff or whatever his name is said that we're going to be what did he say? We're going to be like in our sobriety, we're going to be
neutral.
No, not neutral, but it was more buoyant.
Sanity will have returned. Is it from what he just read?
Yeah.
Okay. We're neither cocky.
We're going to be
placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected.
Yeah, there was something else, but anyway, so I just got back from Japan, and Japan is one giant alcoholic place, and in fact, it's the suicide capital of the world. But I did not feel powerful or because I was only very briefly sober there for like 2 or 3 months. And I was in the midst of, a tremendous mess on top of that. But, in this trip, I did not feel powerful at all against alcohol because you are bombarded with it. And I only knew drinking in Japan, right? So in fact, like to have lunch or dinner, I would decide what I wanted to drink, and then go there, because of the drink that they had. And then, then I would eat dinner there. But I did not feel powerful. I felt really strung out and being pulled in all kinds of directions. And my daughter said to me that she goes, well, what are you drinking? And I was like, I can't drink. And she said, well, why don't you have that fake beer, Dad? And I said, well, if I drink that fake beer today, I definitely am going to drink real beer tomorrow because it tastes kind of similar, right? Because it's beer, I guess, with the alcohol taken out. But I did not feel good at all. Even being in an airport or I felt the pull.
Yeah. Well, that's worth noting.
Mm-hmm.
My experiences, John, whenever we're nursing thoughts that are untrue as true, they create a tendency to have us want to prove they're right, which is what addiction is. It's this attempt to think someday we're going to get it figured out. And I know from my 6 years of trying to negotiate my drug addiction and alcoholism, I always went into meetings. I always pretended I was doing it, but I was always nursing a thought of hope that someday I'll be able to get back to that. Someday I'll be able to do it. Someday, somehow, some way, I will keep it to myself. When I first came in and I heard them say, this isn't just about alcohol, it's about anything from the neck up. I'm like, well, no. That wasn't why I came here. That was startling to me to think it included marijuana, because I thought, okay, well, I'll just continue to do the marijuana, coma maintenance program. And that really got a piece of me. But it took me 6 years to come to terms with the fact that if I have this condition, I have the condition. And if my body doesn't know how to metabolize sugar, it doesn't know how to metabolize sugar. So alcohol is always going to induce that tendency in me to want to drink more because it's an allergy. Allergy is an abnormal response to something. So it has me continue to do the thing that's causing the problem. And yet, if I have a peanut allergy and start suffocating, I tend not to go back to peanuts. I go back to things I'm allergic to that feel good. And that's addiction. So trying to feel better about things, and listen, I thought I had no obsession to drink for 30 years. And my story was I used to go and I'd get 30 days and I'd go out, I'd say, well, fuck, if I could get 30 days, I obviously don't have a problem. And I'd go out for 6 months. And then I'd go back and get 60 days because I realized that after 30 days, I thought, oh, this is a problem. And I'd go back and get 60 days and I'd say, oh, clearly 60 days, I'm in. Go out again, 90 days, 120 days, 6 months, 9 months, 10, 11 and a half months was the longest I got and went out. Every single time thinking this time it will be different. What was interesting is that when I really got the nature of the disease is mental, I realized that marijuana had the same craving and the same attachment to it that alcohol did. And it wasn't because of sugar, though there is some sugar transition. Even in burning tobacco actually creates sugar.
Oh, yeah. Lots of sugar.
So it's, again, a sugar thing. But marijuana, I don't know, marijuana maybe creates some kind of sugar thing. Coke doesn't, I believe, create a sugar. Had the same craving, same abnormal response, because it was the mental thing I was trying to fix with the substance I was abusing. And if the substance had me feel better, I thought I was fixing them as a mental condition. So what do I do in sobriety? Eat, dessert, sugar, cookies, run. I had a friend of mine who said she had no compulsions and told me the week later, did I mention to you that I had a heart attack in my 30s? I said, no, you failed to mention that. And I said, how? She said, I wanted to become a triathlete. And I became a pretty good triathlete, but I ran my body so hard, I had a heart attack in my 30s. And I said, well, certainly that might qualify as compulsion. Maybe.
More is better.
Yeah, but there's endorphins that get released in our body.
Mm-hmm.
Breath work creates a feeling of better. Yoga creates a feeling of better. Not to suggest these things aren't healthy, but when we're using them to feel better about something we're doing that's causing a constriction in our own vascular, cardiac, metabolic structure, it's interesting that we wouldn't simply ask, why is it that I'm imposing this thing chronically to create these conditions I continue to seem to want to overcome and don't even notice it could be the problem? That's insanity. That's the blindness. That's the idea that it's not happening here because I don't see it's happening here. Like the guy who's down in the storm cellar during the storm and comes up and says, nothing's wrong here, honey. Witnessing the devastation, but everything's fine because they're okay. As we talk about it, little peekaboo views start to open up. And what I realized is that I don't have to see it for it to be happening, and I don't have to think it's happening to be happening. And I don't have to think I need to know that it's happening for it to be happening. And I don't need to be sure that it's absolutely not happening because I'm not thinking about it. Because if I'm thinking about it as not happening, I now know that that kind of thinking comes from trying to pretend I'm not thinking exactly what I'm claiming not. I'm thinking exactly what I'm claiming not to be thinking. That I am that deceptive, that I'm that cunning in my own ability to disconnect from my own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty sick way to live when nature is based on reality. How well am I going to function in an environment that's filled with nature if I act unnaturally in relation to it constantly? And my fellows? Well, I think human history writes the answer to that question. We've not been very good with each other, and yet we grow. And my sense is one of the reasons we grow is because if orgasms hurt, we would not probably be growing as a population.
Why?
Because it would hurt and we would avoid it. And because it feels good, we do it with a certain reckless abandon very often, where we have no interest in the responsibility, simply in the immediate gratification of the experience.
Right, speak for yourself.
I got it. I am. But very often, there's a lot of kids on this planet that end up in foster care that at 18 who are taken in, not because anybody cares about them, because they like the money, that at 18, the door closes on them and all of a sudden they're on the streets. We're wondering largely what to do with that group of people right now who were abandoned by parents. They're not just adopted. They're just thrown into a place that somebody's taken them for the check. And I'm not suggesting some foster parents are incredible and keep the kids there as long as they can and get them through college and get them out on their own so they can be self-supporting and self-sufficient and self-able. But it is not the case for many, 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 many. And we don't talk about that openly. And that's a governmental policy that is a bad policy that creates the problem we're now talking about spending $billion more in the government to solve. And that conversation, as far as I'm concerned, is a public conversation. We don't need the government. And I'm not against government when they govern, when they're actually doing what they're saying. But to spend more and more and more and not get the job done, to me, would be a waste of resource, and that would be against nature. That's not how nature works. When nature no longer works, it goes extinct. When government no longer works, it gets bigger. It's against nature. It opposes the basic nature that we can witness every day. So, point is, there are lots of those byproducts that we're paying for simply by not having a public conversation. We can talk now publicly with very little technology to an audience that I would imagine is hungry enough to listen to words that might be valuable, might be worthy of being heard, might influence people to start to notice their own influence has always been intact and always been available. But they maybe haven't been acting on it in ways that are sufficient enough to actually see the kind of change that would warrant more of that kind of action. It's not that we don't make a difference, it's that we don't like the difference we're making, so we tend to stay away from it or disclaim it and try to stay away, pretend that we're not part of it. We're absolutely a part of it. What we do and what we don't do impacts everything all the time, all the time, all the time. So how things are is exactly the way we want them, or they would be different in some productive way. And I would be happy to be wrong about that if it would lead to any greater benefit. And I'm sure there are some shades of it that could be clarified or refined. And I don't suspect it's going to become because somebody says it, but we all begin noticing it's just our nature to be cooperative and helpful and a collective and function on behalf of one another because we're doing it right now. We just don't like what we're actually doing. And in not all ways. I'm not discounting the ways that we have been great. I'm looking at what's wrong so that we can be better about being wrong, which I would think is right, rather than try to get better at being wrong. Or feel better about being wrong. Sorry. Anybody else? Anthony, you
Anyway,
still?
I didn't feel very good in Japan.
Well, John, to that point, if I can make a point, you were also going back to see your kids for how many times have you been back there?
Never.
Yeah, I thought it was the first. I mean, it's very difficult to be immersed in an environment that has caused so much satisfaction and simultaneously so much grief. Very different.
Yeah, of course.
And I know that your intent in going there was also to see them and be with them and remind them of you, given the sort of disconnect that occurred in your life and experience,
Mhm.
which you did.
Yeah, I think there was a connect, but you know, everything that in my life about Japan, because I wanted to move to Japan, right? No one, my wife didn't want to move to Japan, and you know, I'm a Japanophile, so so I get back to Japan and I'm with my kids, and the first thing that occurs to me is that my family is incomplete. You know, my wife is not with me in Japan.
Right.
Which, you know, I mean, and that, even though I thought of it and then pushed it out, it was so reoccurring because everywhere we went, I had been before. So, you know, it accompanied me from the past, right? Like a little tag along, right? So here you are with your children, but your wife's not there. And so your family that you knew was incomplete.
Well, in most of what you went through not being in Japan, so you had a bit of distance from it that probably gave you some relief that you didn't witness when you were there because of all the reminders of that history. Were you in
Clearly.
Tokyo or Kyoto?
No, I was in Tokyo.
And most of your time was in Kyoto, right?
Yes, but that doesn't negate, you know, travel and experientials. And
No, I get it. Okay. So you're a feeling man, you're sensitive, you're aware, and it doesn't add up.
right, it's you know, the search for reality and insanity. You know, and I'll never get those answers, so I have to stop looking for the answers. And yet it weathers me.
You don't have to stop looking. You can continue to look. You're just trying to look into an abyss that's never going to give you an answer. And the one
Right.
answer you do have that you're not used to is starting to witness the fact that as a man, you can be hurt and mourn and grieve people who are not dead at all in your own experience. It's very difficult to live with that. And that isn't so much a question, nor it is an answer. It's just a revelation of witnessing what's actually going on for you honestly enough to allow it to begin to dissipate. Because the freedom, the things that seem to come and happen seem to come from the freedom of that, not from the reinforcement of those thoughts. And my experience is all I ever did my whole life was reinforce thoughts like that and try to get over them and try to leave them behind long enough where they didn't seem to hurt. But if I got associated to people close to that situation, I could feel that hurt all over again because I never dealt with it. I just pushed it aside, tried to deny it, tried to figure them out rather than say, wow, this is having a very odd impact on me. Somebody else made a decision to do something I don't understand, and I feel completely out of sorts as a result of it. Now, obviously, when you make a marriage and you make a commitment and all that stuff, you have some expectations. And it can feel like a betrayal. But the fact is, people have always done what they wanted. And we just generally think they should do what they agree the way we think they should. And when they don't, it seems mystifying because we think that's reality and truth. It isn't. It's just an agreement.
Mm-hmm.
It's an agreement. It's a contract. And love is not contractual. My greatest freedom came from noticing my second wife, Elizabeth, who you remember, brilliant, beautiful woman. I still love her. I mean, I'm still fascinated by her. It wasn't until I realized I could love her. She had left me and married somebody else at one when we were dating. And it just wiped me out. I'd never had the experience sober. And every morning I got up at 5 a.m. and got dressed warm and walked to the Santa Monica Pier, 5-mile round trip every single morning, and just meditated and prayed because I was useless during the day. My whole head was in a knot. And one day it occurred to me that I didn't have to stop loving her, and I'd never stopped loving her because she could do what she wanted, and I was free. It literally gave me a sense of freedom I'd never had. And I started laughing and said, of course I love her. That's the struggle. I haven't been fighting what she did. I've been fighting what I've been thinking about her and I started to just love her silently in my own way. And 2 weeks later, after a year and a half, she called me.
And then you married her, right?
Exactly. And then I divorced her. But when she called, she said, are you angry? And I said, no, I love you. I'm not angry. And I really wasn't. I was just glad to hear from her. And I realized that she was struggling and she'd have her own emotional things and history and abuse as a child, all kinds of stuff. But I loved her and I eventually married her and we got a divorce almost immediately. But, she said to me, you just don't understand what it means to a woman to be married. And I said, well, you got me there. If I'm honest, I got to tell you, I do not. And so I said, I'll go out on a limb. I'll try it. We'll see if that makes the difference. It doesn't seem to. But nevertheless, in the intervening years, she went back and remarried the guy that she was first married, divorced for me then, who I love. I love this guy. I call him my husband-in-law. And I'm fascinated by her. And the beautiful thing is, Katie loves her. Katie loves going out with her because she's she's brilliant, she's fashionable, and all the things that Katie loves, she loves. And I think it's more than that. I think she's sincere and she's things that humans are that are when given the freedom are fascinating to watch and be part of. But she also said to me at a lunch we had with everybody, including Fee, her husband, who I also love and is a great, solid, honest man. She said, I think Katie came to you to do for you what your mother couldn't do for you because she died so young. And I said, that's probably one of the most generous things I've ever heard somebody say that could have been offended and could have been caustic about what happened between us. And it was sort of startling to me. So my sense is that the remedy is the coming to terms. And I'll tell you another thing, John, in relation to Jana's issue with responsibility. What I realized is I manifested those situations because that's what I needed to finally get my attention, to see things with a level of perspective that I had been so unwilling to even admit. And when I started taking it on as my responsibility and saying, I did this, I created this, I was the cause of this, I started getting benefits from it that far outweighed the things I thought I was remorseful and regretful and hateful or spiteful or grieving or mourning over, because I began to realize I was actually mourning the fullness of my own experience. So I could have been for that person things I probably never was. And a lot of their assessment were probably pretty accurate about me because I was constantly catering to ideas about how much more I needed to be by having them think I was more than I actually was in terms of my own thinking. And so twisted and convoluted that it was just mind-bending to even imagine anybody ever found me interesting. And as that went away, Katie came along, who's one of the best people I've ever been with. I mean, it's just startling how much good she's done for me and how I listen. I never listened to anybody. I never listened. My relationships were five-year lease options. And that's how I thought of them. I was in real estate and I figured if it's not working 5 years, I'm not extending the lease, we'll get a divorce. And I even told her that. I said, this is a day at a time, nothing more for me. And I believe that that's the best way to have a relationship because I believe that's how relationships are built, a day at a time. If it's about forever, I'm too worried about things I can't think about anyhow correctly. If it's about today, I can do something about that. It's a little simpler, a little more immediate, a little more possible. And so that's what I do.
Well, I admire your sobriety.
It hasn't come quickly, and my sense is some of this stuff took a little, it talks about swallowing some big chunks in the big book. And my sense is this insane thing is the biggest chunk humanity has to swallow. And it's probably no secret why Adam's apples ended up getting stuck in men's throat while we blamed Eve for eating it. Isn't that interesting? We don't call it Eve's apple, and it doesn't happen in women. And I think the story has been perverted and twisted from the beginning. And none of us have any obligation to continue to maintain the party line. Whatever that party is, the party has long been over. But we're going to continue to talk about that, John, and I'm thankful that you brought it up publicly, because I'm sure there are people who will relate to that experience. Divorce is a very tricky thing to go through.
Yes, sir.
It is really like a death.
Yes, sir.
Except with one exception. When people die, everybody tends to see the best in them afterward, and that is not often the case in a divorce. It's redemption to see the best, but it's possible.
Jack.
Yes.
When your ex-wife told you what felt like a revelation to you, in that, Katie did for you what your mother was never able to, and you said it startled you. What about it startled you? You didn't totally finish that thought.
For generosity, right?
Well,
I think even more primary to that, the silly part was that I was actually listening.
Okay.
That startled me.
Yeah.
Because I actually heard her. It was like made such an imprint on me, because she was being honest, and it was something that had never occurred to me, though I'd always said to Katie, my father and mother would have loved you. They would have known, they would have been happy to know that I was with you, because you would have been who they would have thought was good for me. And that, I thought, was very different for me in my experience. And for Elizabeth to say that, I was just struck by how fresh it was and how unexpected it was. And it was probably one of the first meals we had as two couples after she'd gotten remarried. And I just, it would have maybe seemed brash in a sense, but it was so honest that it just fit. And and I heard it. And it's it's very rare that I ever listen with that kind of clarity. Nor do I think, is it clear that most people speak with a degree of clarity. So I think we're all somewhat stumbling over what we think we should be saying, rather than the honesty that we could potentially share, that my sense is always comes through and is always heard in ways that are somewhat startling in that regard. I didn't even know you were with us.
Well, you wouldn't be the first to say that.
You were in my computer that anybody who isn't on screen doesn't show at all. No name, nothing.
Yeah.
So I have my laptop. We're down in Florida.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, you're a little closer to the screen than usual.
How long have you been with us?
Probably for about an hour.
Wow, you're so quiet.
Yeah. That is also, well, that's not something people usually say.
S seems to come.
How's baby?
I was holding her for a bit there, so she's a little bit.
He tends to come toward the end, or speak up toward the end.
Yeah, I usually can't quite get to you until at least 9:45, just because.
Baby duty.
Yeah, which of course is mostly on my wonderful wife, who does far more for me than any dozens of archetypes of mother have ever done.
That is a beautiful gift of femininity,
Yeah.
the potential of femininity.
Well, but Jack,
especially as a mother.
yeah, well, but I guess, and that helps me connect, right? In the spirit of saying things honestly and candidly, you know, I was struck by that when you said that, because I would venture to say that anyone who's ever witnessed, and I haven't witnessed it, you know, tons, but you know, in the few years I've known you and the few times I've encountered you and Katie together, that dynamic of her immense capability of caring and her ability to care for you in you know, with such sort of grace, like, seems, you know, just I remember the first time I saw her, in that she kind of floated onto the screen and handed you a green juice. Like, that dynamic is so obvious to anyone who has ever encountered you. I'm sort of surprised that that was a revelation to you, I guess. You know, that's why I mentioned it.
Well, it was a revelation that she would say it, I think. I think that was the surprise, is that it would come out at a joint couples lunch that might have been normally somewhat seemingly staged and maybe a little less than
I see. So the sort of honesty and the ability to deliver that honesty was beautiful and startling. I see.
In front of her husband too. And I think that was a real, I mean, it sort of made the full circuit too, that I realized that she had the growth in the way I'd always hoped she might in her own experience. And she certainly has, because she's definitely, the thing we went through was hard for her. It was hard. It was easier for me, I think, because I was clear about what was going on from the beginning. And I had a premonition of the fact that I was doing it as an experiment. I wanted to make sure that she knew that I was willing to do anything. And I put myself in the line of whatever community property issues might exist to do that. And I do it. I did it face first with complete surrender. So I had a readiness to it that I don't think she had. And I think it helped her get that. And I think that moment actually gave me that. It was 10 years later, 12 years later. So yeah, I think I saw that she'd actually gone through exactly what I knew she was capable of. But the greater issue there is that if that's all of our nature, and that isn't what we're saying to each other, and that isn't how we're functioning to one another, and we have to go through this laborious process of grief and mourning and all that stuff to seem to get there, is all that stuff any more necessary than it is for people to have near-death experiences before we start actually conceding an absolute knowing nature that simply has always been that absolute knowing nature? And it's interesting the lengths that we go to kind of think that it's something that we can finally concede. Once we get, we're almost there, but we're not quite there yet to actually just concede. It's here now. It's always here now. And start making that part of the mantra during the day. Like, if you try to get addicted to reality, it's impossible. Because there is no lack in it. There is no limit in it. We're not missing any of it. The only things we get addicted to are things that seem to be hard to get, which is probably why they call it a black market. Things that seem to be out of view and hard to receive and get. And look at the violence involved in that whole dynamic of selling all that stuff that's typically. And if the violence isn't between the people selling it, it ends up in the overdoses, the people who easily get it and get it in amounts that are too much and try to use it to get rid of pain when in fact they kill themselves. And what do? Leave an everlasting scar of pain in the people that are left behind to a degree. I don't know that it's everlasting, but it's difficult to overcome that. I spoke at a meeting last Friday night, and the guy's 23-year-old daughter, 14 rehabs in, overdose, 23 years old.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I can hear about that on the news and think nothing of it, but when it starts happening closer, it's interesting how you begin to realize these are real people impacting real people. I don't know how real we are ultimately, given the sort of temporary nature of our existence, but for the time we're here and what we do, the impact on humanity is great to have to witness those things. That's the same sort of violence at the other end of an institutionalized drug killing somebody as somebody being shot with a gun violently somewhere else in that same wholesale slaughter that's been going on down in Mexico. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed through this drug addiction. hundreds of thousands. That's almost as many as were killed in Iraq as a result of the war.
Yeah.
And so it's happening. And my sense is, do we need to go to that extent to begin to talk about the fact that we have an absolute nature that is absolutely in love with each other because it is the source of love? It is not binding us in any sort of, think about being bound to love. Like, what would be wrong with that? How could you say, I hate this, I can't take any more? It would be everything. It would be bliss. It would be all the things we seem to want to strive for and get. And if that's our nature and that's what we're dispelling by spelling things out in ways that are untrue, using words that are completely inaccurate, dispelling that rumor would be easy just to say, oh, it's just a thought. It's literally just a thought masquerading as reality. And to even say a thought's masquerading in reality is to give a thought the independence it would need to be able to make that decision on its own. When who is it making the decision? Me. Each of us make that. That's something I crossed earlier too, which was this point of each of us makes the decision of what we do every time, every moment, all of us. It isn't what I say. It isn't what anybody else says. That it's what we do with it that we own in that sense. That actually becomes applicable for us. And if we say there's nothing there, we're not going to use it. We're not going to utilize it to prove that the thought's true, the thought's right, the thought's real. Rather than say, what if I just try this on? What if this isn't a condition I have to do anything, but it's just something I can do? And what if I try it on and it fits? And what if I try it on and it fits and it looks great? Even when I thought it would look like hell and feel like hell and wouldn't work and all those other things I thought. And what if all of a sudden that was the case? And I started wearing this more often and started talking about it more often. What's the impact I would have then on other people versus the impact I have repeating the stories and trying to mire myself in the conspiracies of all these narratives that we culturally continue to repeat that aren't true, that have no real basis in them it's whatsoever, other than a repetitious, almost trance that we're in. Hallucinating, making believe that our life is a hallucination, wondering why we feel like frauds and feel like we need, like imposters at times. We need to grow up and get better and look better and have more and do all that stuff. We already have everything. There is no more we can have, and there is no less than we could have. None. Doesn't exist in that realm.
Okay, so I need help with something, you guys. I have to make an amend. I viscerally need to make an amends to someone. Can I run it by you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went to Bonnie Raitt the other night. I was the designated driver. My 42-year-old daughter, who's still out there, I dropped her off at a girlfriend's, but I kept my phone available to me in case she needed me because she was going to the concert as well. And I was with another woman, and the other woman is hardly ever present and always on her phone and doing her own thing. And it's all about her. And I knew that, but I thought I could be gracious and make it through it anyway. So I texted my daughter and said, do you need a ride home? And she said, yeah. And then she went radio silent. And I was very concerned because I didn't know if she was at the concert or if she's out drinking somewhere or where she was geographically. And I was trying to hunt her down, and I was calling her husband because I was in town and I could grab her. And this gal goes, well, I don't know why her friends can't drive her home. And I go, because they're out there and they're drunk and I can't get a hold of her. And she goes, well, I don't understand. And I said, well, you don't need to. You just need to let me do what I'm doing. And then we made it to the car, and she goes, just tell them where we are. We're on the corner of Hana Highway. So in between her not being present, she just kept throwing things out there. So finally I was just like, hey, you don't understand. I'm in the midst of this and I need to do what I need to do. This is my daughter. And she's like, well, how can I possibly know that when I'm on the phone texting somebody else? Like, well, that's the whole point. So anyway, I found my daughter. She was at a bar in Wailuku town, and she says she got roofied. She had passed out, and I poured her into the car. I got her, and we drove in complete silence the whole way to my daughter's house. And then the gal says, this was the worst night of my life. It's not what I expected at all. And I'm like, sorry, it just kind of is what is. And I wasn't like defending a whole lot, but
Sounds like a milestone.
Pardon?
Sounds like a milestone.
I feel
Worst night of your life?
This This was the night before last, and I just feel sick that I can't come to a point of I can't make an amends to her, not because of my resentments or anything. It's just I don't even know how. What do I even say? Like, I don't want, I mean, do I go, I want to kind of explain it to her and say, like, you were so fucking unaware and just blabbing things out to me in the midst of something that I was actually being calm and aware and doing the steps that needed to be done to protect my daughter like any mother would. And I can't make her sober or any of that. I can just, I guess it's not really enabling, but do whatever I can to make sure she's safe. And this woman was so mad. She's very wealthy and entitled, and she thinks everyone's her employee. And I did used to be a vegan chef for her for a long time until I just couldn't anymore. But I want to, like, I guess what I'm thinking, or what was suggested to me, is that I should just say, if there's any way you can just forgive me for my transgressions or my lack of grace or whatever, and just leave it at that with no explanation.
I think that's a great idea.
Well, given that the whole thing is based on an explanation, I would say a further explanation would probably not resolve it.
Thank you.
And keep in mind too, Jenna, you see her as not being present. I guarantee you she's present.
Yeah.
You're seeing very clearly what's wrong with her. It's not what she's doing that you don't like. It's that she's not doing what you want that you don't like.
That's the whole conundrum. That's why I feel like it's 10 steps back. Like, why the fuck am I judging her? Why can't I just, without explaining myself, just say, hey, I'm sorry that you were disappointed in the evening. If you could just forgive me. And clearly I can't, I know this is even the stupidest fucking 10 steps back. I can't be around her. She somehow, it must be something in me, but she always digs about like stuff about Delmar. That stuff's not even current. And she wasn't even a privy to it. She met him twice in her whole life en route to the waterfall. And she's like, well, how are things with you and Delmar? You know, last time I heard he was really angry. I go, he's never been angry. We spent 5 years together. We've never been anything but loving. Why do you twist things around? It's just so uncomfortable, and I'm uncomfortable, and I know that I'm responsible. I'm aware of my responsibility, and I don't know how to gracefully go through this. I prayed yesterday for grace, and it just isn't coming. I guess I don't know. I'm in a conundrum.
You're thinking it's not there. Again, the basis of it is thinking that your thinking needs to get you there, and your thinking is what's giving you the impression that you're not there. So that's just insane thinking.
I know. I'm tortured.
Well, let's stop there.
I'm fucking tortured all day.
Let's just stop there for a minute. All right. This isn't new, and yet it's new. This is probably something that you have done for so long that you really believe it happens to you and it isn't being caused by you.
No, it's being caused by me. I just don't know how to unravel it.
Well, you begin to admit it, begin to have it, begin to notice that this has nothing to do with, if you weren't thinking the thoughts you had, what she did would be laughable to you.
Right. Why isn't it?
Another person having thoughts that have nothing to do with what you're thinking or interested in, and you're never going to get through it. You could come up with the best explanation in the world, and all it would do is explain why you think she shouldn't be doing what she's doing, while in fact she did exactly what she did, right? So,
I know it, and I'm aware, and I just don't know how to.
So let's say you're aware of some of it, and you're clearly, there's some part of this that seems so intrinsic, and so natural that you would be offended that she is such an idiot and she has all these traits that you want to get away from. Let's say those traits are the ones that you have never quite mentioned to yourself, to your own experience, that you actually have. The same things you do. Let's say those things you found to be so objectionable in her are in fact exactly the things that you do. Excuse me 1 second. The maid is at the door. 30 minutes? 30 minutes? 30? Thank you. So when I came to terms with Elizabeth, for instance, it was beginning to see that it was my actual love for her and my want to express that I was struggling with. And to any degree that I made up a story to justify that it was the tits and tats between us that I was arguing over, the bits and pieces, and the this and the that's, All I did was continue to tell a story, which drove me crazy because it was denying the actual source of it, which is that I loved her. My sense is, as I was talking before this came up, if that love is there, like to S's point, if that love is there, do we need to die before we actually see it? Do we need to have near-death experiences to actually begin to admit it? Or is it possible in the present, which is all we ever are? You said she wasn't present. You believe she's not present because she's doing what she's doing the way she's doing it. No, she's present doing those things. They may be insane. There may be nothing to look at there that has any substance that you're ever going to fix because it's insane, but it's certainly not going to help her get better by you being more insane over what she's doing that's insane. I guarantee you that.
No, I agree. And I want to like tell her that she can do whatever she wants to do. And
knows that. She just did it. She knows that. She just did it.
I want her to not feel judged by me because apparently the silent.
She was judged by you. Come to terms with this in actual terms. She was judged by you. She's being judged by you right now. You're thinking that she needs your save. You need to save her from the potential peril she's in over what you did that's already over. I guarantee you she is not sitting on a Zoom call right now trying to figure this out with anybody else.
Oh, she's fucking chatting to everybody. Believe me, I've gotten like 15 texts from every vegan on the North Shore of Maui saying, why are you so fucking mean to Sarah? I'm like, silent treatment's mean, but I mean, and I don't care what anybody thinks. I just want...
You do, though. You do care.
Well, not so much in that community of them, because I know that...
Well, you knew how many of them were texting. You care enough to be aware of it.
Well, I know I need to take an action. I need to like say I'm sorry. I need to.
Do you?
Yeah. Well,
really?
No, just let it dissolve.
Well, come to terms with it first. Otherwise, what are you doing? Are you saying you're going to tell her more about you? Well, here's some more about me you don't want to hear. I'm sorry. I'm this. I'm that. What's that? More of the same thing. Maybe you could have a constructive relationship with her and say, you know what? I mean, what I tend to do is I say, I'm not always in my best behavior. I don't always know how to deal with circumstances that don't go where I want them to. And you know what happens very interestingly? The more simple I am about it, the more people relate to it. And they often say, you know what? Either am I. I really struggle with things often that get beyond me, that seem to be out of control, that seem to... And especially when it comes to a daughter, she's probably got kids.
3.
Yeah, so she has some idea of what it means to be a parent concerned about their kid who's disappeared.
Oh, this chick, no, she's a fucking cat saver. She has 37 cats. She's never had a kid in her life. No.
Oh.
No. If it was a cat that was in peril, she would have given me her full attention.
So then she knows. She has she has an experience to understand your experience, but you're not going to talk her into that. Nobody's ever going to talk. None of us are ever going to talk anybody into it by approaching it from the insanity that we're trying to heal. Only sanity.
No, I don't want to convince her about the kid thing or even make it about that. I just want to address my poor behavior. Because I threw $100 bill at her and said, like, here you go, beat it.
Well, that probably wasn't a high point.
No.
So... But listen, in the midst of disturbance is probably not the time to immediately make that amends. It's coming to terms with it. And I'm not talking about trying to resolve it so you feel better about it. I'm talking about doing your best to be honest about it and see the source of it is what you're doing that's causing you this grief. And really come to terms with that. We can talk during the week if you want to.
Okay.
You know, because that
like any way I try to make an amends to her, I want to explain what a fuckface she was and why I behaved the way I did. And I know that's completely incorrect, that I'm 100% responsible for my reactions to other people's actions and that I could have done so much better. And it was... Anna, do
you see how you can know those things in thought and still act in ways that don't align with that, which would suggest to me that you're dealing with things you don't think you're even thinking? You're beginning that substructure.
I'm justifying, and it's so sickening to me. It made me, I felt like I was sick all day yesterday because I go, I'm just fucking justifying. And I thought that I could do better. I just thought I could do better than a justification or a torture. I shouldn't even be tortured. It should just be more of a neutrality.
Right now is all you ever have. And as you begin to just say, wow, this is the I'm up to something. This is where it came from.
Yes.
I started realizing, man, I go to wild extremes to avoid what I'm doing. Even right now, as I'm doing it, I'm trying to come up with some reason not to simply concede it's what I'm doing now. I'm so blind to it that I don't even want to make believe there can be any more to it than what I'm thinking about it, rather than just starting to take a deep breath and live with it and say, you know what, whatever it is, I would like to become familiar with it enough that I can at least be cognizant of it in some meaningful way, rather than completely numb myself to it in some new way and launch some new ship that's going to create the same circumstance with somebody else. And I'm going to wonder how I got back there again.
Ooh, don't say that. Don't say that. I want this to be the end of this poor behavior.
Of course, it's like our last drink. You know, final night when the Coke is gone and everything. That's it. I'm never doing it again.
She even suggested my lack of grace was because of my sobriety. Well, you're just fucking being like this because you're sober. I'm like, so if I did a shot,
might have been right. There might be a little dry sobriety in this. Think about it. Of course, you're peaked in your experience. You don't have 6 drinks in you trying to nullify it.
No.
You know what the weird thing is, Jenna, is my suspicion. Even while we were drinking, the feelings were still being hurt and the interactions were still happening. Exactly. We just weren't paying attention to them because we were inebriated. We were intoxicated with the idea that all we were was what we were experiencing in our immediate head and the thoughts we were having about it. And we're missing the bounty of information that we have built into our entire bodily system and functions and our knowingness. That's actually, those things become obvious as contrast because we have an absolute stable knowingness that's in perfect order and is never out of control. We know it. We talk about always wanting to be perfect. We're trying to perfect stuff in a limited way that's dysfunctional while we already have the perfection at our hands, and we don't even want to accept what we're doing, which makes what we're doing perfect when we finally let it be what it is rather than what we think it should be, could be, wished it was, wished it would have been if it hadn't been for this, that, or them, all that other stuff we go into. It's fucking nutty.
Wow.
Snickers is good nutty, but there's not. I don't think we turn out sweet. I think we get bitter.
I just wasn't gracious. I could have done.
How about now? I think you're being pretty gracious to talk about it openly right now. And I think it's good insight for people because you know what? I do that same thing. And your insight gives me insight into the little pettiness that I have and the sort of presumptions I have about how wrong people are and how sure I am about it. And I talk about it with such confidence, as though anyone has any interest in listening to my confidence while I'm normally complaining about them.
I heard a speaker talking, I don't know if this is relevant, so I haven't really mentioned it, but he said, if somebody's insulting you because of your blue hair, and can't stand your blue hair, but you don't even have blue hair, would you really give them that much thought as to what they're yelling at you? As they're yelling these things about how terrible your blue hair looks, and they hate blue, and you don't have blue hair. I mean, you're really going to get very upset.
Isn't that the point about there's no real true story? It's just the reactions.
Well, it's also the point Bill makes that we wouldn't treat sick friends this way. We don't go to the hospital and say, somebody, you're such an idiot. You got cancer. What a jerk. You are such a jerk.
We have. Come on.
Oh, maybe we have. Yeah.
It's all in your head.
That's probably true. Yeah. Well, that's the same thing, though. I mean, imagine sitting next to somebody who's suffering and we're thinking, well, they deserve this.
Not so much they deserved it, but they're responsible for it.
So are we.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
isn't. It's interesting that we think people are individually responsible for disease.
There
We are
is that.
exclusively, completely, all of a sudden detached from the whole
And
system.
I forgot, Jenna, if you would have used my favorite line, you would have said, you know what? If we're even discussing it, obviously it's a possibility. And not only am I rude sometimes to other people, but I'm worse to myself, or whatever she was accusing you from, because you probably are worse to yourself than you are to other people about it. And then there would be no controversy. I love that line.
It's when she's saying, like, tell her just to walk over to Hana Highway. I go, well, she's fucking passed out in a bar and I'm just hoping her skirt's down. So let me deal with that right now rather than giving her directions on where to walk to. I guess that
But
was
guys, I'm sorry.
no, maybe that wasn't so ungracious. Maybe that was just factual.
But truth is born of argument.
Not in reality.
Yeah, in reality.
No, there is no
Because you
debate.
talk about truth and natural things, but in reality, truth is born of argument.
Well, so then there was no truth before humans argued.
Well, I don't want to get into the genealogy of
You have to. You started
humankind,
it.
but
I don't want to get into the specificity of only when we're here to think of it as something based in what we do, because we argue over truth and think it becomes true because we agree with it. And if a lie can become true because we agree with it, I would say that is not truth. And we have
well,
been
no,
masked.
but the reason, the thing that I backed off on was that we have no idea where humankind came from. So we could argue that all day long.
Exactly. But that doesn't mean I know where humankind came from.
Uh-huh.
Wherever we came from. I don't
Uh-huh.
have to specifics to know that much, and I don't have to argue over it in any kind of way to make believe that my argument's ever going to make any difference to that fact. How we are is how we are, and how it is right now is how it is right now, and it's probably exactly how it's always been.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to diminish your point, John, but just make the point that within humanity, we have argued over what we call truth, trying to define something that is indefinable. If you went back to a moment in time and tried to define it, the universe wouldn't be big enough to contain the volumes of information we would have to put on paper to describe every single element going on right now. That would be truth.
I don't negate your point.
Yeah.
Okay, so my thought was to just text her and say, I'm very abundantly aware that I owe you an apology, but I'm working on it. Like putting a bookmark in it.
I would say if you're feeling an impulsive need to text her to resolve it, I would not act on that. I would take that as a clue to, when you're ready, when you know you don't need to, Jana, is when you have the freedom to make the decision that will have a kernel to it that isn't based in despair and conflict, but based in a loving kindness and generosity. And it may just be, I really thank you for all you tried to do. And I obviously was caught off guard by my own sentiment.
That's it. That's all I wanted was you to script something.
But
now
I don't want you to use my words. I want you to be
I'm using them.
No. I want you to be there. Get there. Listen, if there's any value in these conflicts, and I guarantee you these are like roadmaps, they are perfect instruction manuals for what we claim not to be doing. They're insight into this part of us we claim to be subconscious, that we're conscious enough of the subconscious to use it to blame for what we're doing, but we don't want to be conscious of it enough to be able to recognize it's often the cause of what we're doing. Get to that point. Don't worry about it. She will survive without your amends. And you're not going to fix it anyhow by trying to do it too quickly. Give it a breath. Embrace what's happened. Look at it as an opportunity. Learn from it. All of this stuff is a guidance system. The world is a campus, and we all share this campus, and there's no enrollment fee whatsoever. We don't have to take the education. We don't have to learn from it. But you know what happens when we don't? We learn from it. We learn because we have more conflict, we have more turmoil, we create more circumstances that we were sure should have ended by the last one that we tried to fix ended. We're finally over it, and we're in the face of another one all the time.
And we can't fix someone else's disappointment. I mean, the statement that it was the worst evening of her life, that's her perception. But
Jana, think of that. In her whole life, no one's been able to accomplish what you just did.
Fuck,
That
I'm
is
a
a
movie star.
landmark occasion. That's a
I'm
landmark occasion. Think about that.
Damn,
That's
I'm
a-
good.
That's a record.
I'm fucking amazing.
Think of that. Nobody has been able to match your ability, apparently.
In my sobriety yet, which was annoying to her.
Yeah, I'll bet it was.
Very.
But her opinion's only worth something if you give it worth.
Just remember, opinions are basically whatever we think. We don't have true thoughts. We have opinions. They're all calculated, justified, rationalized, filled with logic. All that stuff is reason. Knowledge isn't in reason, and it doesn't have logic, and it isn't part of a thinking, understanding process. It's just a knowingness. And as you recognize that, you will know exactly what to do, because the source of it will not be conflict and reactivity and impulsiveness and compulsiveness.
I'll get there.
You're there. But if you don't think you're there, again, it's revealing some issues that you're still maintaining. And this is the job of this. If there's any function we have in getting together, this is the function, is to start noticing that this stuff as it comes up, and I have it happen every day. I not only have it happen every day, I have it happen multiple times every day, many times every day, because I'm looking at all the variations and all the quick thoughts I have about how idiotic people are and starting to say, wow, I got just a tirade of opinions that occurs. There's lady.
Tirade.
Or just humor is always good. Say, I'm so sorry that my daughter got roofied last night and spoiled your night.
I think I'm just
You text her and tell her that your daughter got her some roofies.
or I'm gonna take a couple of roofies.
He had some left over and we didn't want to spoil her experience. So I'm gonna slip it in a drink at a theater or drive in near you.
And how is the roofie explanation not just like the typical alcoholic? I said, well, let's go to a meeting, honey. We should probably go to a meeting. She goes, oh no, I'm just gonna, alter my drinking. And I of course have seen this movie before, so I can only just let her do what she's gonna do, as horrifying as that is. As much as I'd like to control it and put a little leash on her and drag her to meetings and make her read the big book and I would like to envelop her like an octopus and give her freedom and knowledge to not do it, but she's
so maybe that's exactly what you'd also like to do with that part of you that's acting in ways that are dry.
Yeah. There you go.
With that same potential to get to see that you're asking us for an answer, and the answer is you know better, and you're struggling with what you think you know, and it doesn't mean that it's illegitimate to struggle with things that are insane, but to continue to think insanely that you're going to solve it with more insane thought is, by the way, insane. I'll just mention.
There's been a lot of lack of sleep too, because I usually go to bed at 9 and I'm up at 4:30. And because of the concert and because of the roofies and all of that, I didn't get home till almost 1 o'clock. And then I woke up at my regular 4:30, and then I freaked out all day and compulsively painted my guest cottage and stuff. So I have had a lack of sleep too. So physiologically, I'm not at my best either.
Yeah, consider that this is an opportunity, literally of your lifetime, because it happens to be happening now.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, how willing are you to have it as it is and allow it to be long enough to begin to actually have the emotional connection to it that you'll begin to see is very much rooted in denial and fighting your own experiences at some point where you were hurt and you make believe that somehow you weren't, and then you lived with the stress from that and thought that that was natural and have become so accustomed to it that it goes on and on and on, and you think someday it'll end because you just keep adding more and more misery to it, and it's never going to happen. The big book says avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery, telling us two things: that we're the cause of it and it's deliberate when it's happening. We're actually doing it for good purpose, and we're thinking of it as something happening to us. Begin to notice this is an actual manifestation of your own willingness to start to look at these things. Then if you're willing to actually do that, you'll start noticing that now that you put them in your view, what you're looking at is disturbing and difficult and probably worth noticing.
I just want to be Buddha.
You are.
Oh, thank
And
you.
if Buddha was entertaining the thoughts you were having right now, he would be appalled.
Maybe he would have a belly laugh. Maybe I would just be his little child and he would say,
Oh,
oh,
he would have a belly laugh, all right, given the
Oh.
belly they depict him as having.
oh, knock it off, Jan
That
Jan.
would roar. Listen, you're laughing.
I am.
And
Thank you.
to think of these things so seriously is to show how serious we take the self we think we are. And the personification of that self are all these personality traits that we think are offended and that we think we need to fight for. They're not real. They're simply thoughts about thoughts, thinking about thinking. We don't think to ourselves and we don't think of ourselves. We think to our thoughts. That's it. There's no self there. That's just thinking of itself. When I think of myself, it doesn't create who I am. Imagine how that may seem like that to a kid when they become a fireman at 3 because they're wearing boots and have a hose. It never turned them into a fireman. And if they were, they'd put everyone at risk trying to actually operate on that basis.
I can just become an observer.
You are an observer.
Okay.
If you weren't observing it, you wouldn't see it. You're starting to see it, and it's distressing when you look at distressing things. What's interesting about that is if you're distressed when you're looking at distressing things, you're seeing them honestly. If you're you're seeing them as something else, you're thinking of them dishonestly. There's the conflict. We mourn the potential of our experience by making believe it isn't even happening. That's insanity on a daily basis, on a momentary basis. I don't think the lady's thinking about what shouldn't be happening.
Who even cares what she's thinking? We're all one.
You
And
look so grown up.
we just are all one, and I'm responsible. I'm really responsible.
So consider to that degree, all you're struggling with are thoughts that are not responsible. It isn't you, because you are not your thoughts. You're just thinking things irresponsibly, and to think those things are responsible is insanity again, and you can see the conflict there again, right, Jana?
Am I a dog chasing my tail, my thoughts chasing my thoughts?
Yes, well, and it's not your thoughts doing it, it's you allowing them to do that and then claim that it's them doing it as though it's something you're not doing.
That's when I have to be an observer.
You are an observer. You think you're not an observer. You're observing the thoughts chasing the thoughts. How could you not see them? If you were the thoughts, you wouldn't see the thoughts chasing the thoughts. You would just be noticing you'd be noticing a very fast experience happening. You are the observer to even witness it.
And what a gift.
The question is, are those thoughts real or are they simply imagined? And if they're just imagined and you're asking them to do what they're doing, do you have any compelling reason to continue? And I would say, yes, you have some compelling reasons to continue because it's based on reason. It's based on a lack of reason. It's based on a lack of logic because it's insane to think somehow they're happening despite what you're doing. We haven't even acknowledged that we do what we do much enough to begin to see in the present that we can either begin to continue to do it or just let it go. Stop it by not starting it. It's so simple that we think it's complicated. It's so simple that we think we're not an observer when we're not doing it. We think we're not present when we're not doing it. We're absolutely present doing it. All we're doing is something with our thinking. It's thinking is something we do. It is not who we are. If we misuse a computer and put bad information in, it is not going to work right. We understand that very clearly. We don't think of it in the same terms with our own thinking. We think it's who we are. We think it's what we are. We think our personality is offended. We think it's something we can't do anything about. We think it's happening to us. We don't say when we put bad information to the computer is fucked up and it's happening to us. We say, I got to learn how to run the computer better.
I don't know that I feel like my personality is offended. I feel like it's offensive.
The two are the same thing, by the way.
Oh,
when you're seeing it in both directions because the opposites are connected. They're not different.
Offensive and reactive, and it's not staying in the love at all.
It is, though. You're loving, and your nature is love, while your thinking isn't. That's all. You're not expressing it. Notice the distinction.
Yeah.
One is something we are. The other one is something we're doing. Beings are, humans do.
Oh, there you go. There, I knew you would come up with something. That's it right there.
I didn't come up with it.
Yeah, you did.
It's
In
been
my
going on-
world.
it's
In
been
my
going on.
world, you did.
If this has been going on a long time. Humans
I
have
am
always thought
love.
it's one of our defining features. Beings have always been. They just are.
I get no satisfaction out of the whole being right thing. I don't even argue anything with anybody. I'm
do.
apolitical, and I honestly, I just don't. I just want everyone to just be, and it feels like that neutrality thing. And there's so many words saved and so much dialogue saved. There wasn't much dialogue in this controversy, by the way. There was a lot of silence.
No, my sense is the dialogue was all in one head.
One you're familiar
Listen,
with?
that thing you just said of I don't care and I don't know, consider that all those things you're trying to disclaim are things you do. You can't disclaim something you're not doing. Start to notice that when you go into all those protestations, you're actually stating the essence of what you're doing while saying you're not doing it. Why would you bother saying you're not doing it if you weren't doing it? There would be no reason. You didn't just tell us all you weren't a circus performer.
Kind of.
Yeah, well, yes, you did effectively.
Yes, I did.
But the point is, just begin to notice that. The ease of it is like, oh, why do we even go to great lengths to claim I'm not doing something if I weren't doing it? What would the point be?
Good point. That's good. It's very painful to think that she's a mirror to me, though. And I know that could
Thank you. Now consider that pain as what you live with daily, making believe it isn't there, and wonder why these things keep coming up for you to have a chance to see accurately and honestly. You think it's possible to hate somebody who doesn't live in your head, where your thoughts and your feelings and your pain and pleasure centers happen in the exact same place in your brain. And you think it's possible somebody 2 feet away from you can have a greater impact on you than what you think about what they're doing 2 feet away. Impossible.
kind of trippy, huh?
Well, it's kind of not a trip at all because there's nowhere to go to actually concede it. It's kind of trippy that we think it's somewhere else, someone else, something else, some other time, some other place. I'll get there. I just need more of this or less of that. And when I get there, I'll be fine. And I never seem to ever get there because I'm there the whole time. Of course, I can't get there. I'm here the whole time denying that I'm there.
It's the neutrality of it. So everything's okay. That's the truth of it, because it can't be any other than it is, because it is what it is.
Very good. So you know what all that you're thinking is? What you're thinking.
Stinking thinking.
And if it's sick, if it's sick, it's just sick thinking. When you align with that, all of a sudden it doesn't become a conflict. You don't have the sense of mourning and loss and grief and hatred and vitriol and need to fix somebody else, need to get over. I gotta get over there and fix them, because all of a sudden you become okay. And what do you find? That if that woman needs help, and she may well, you might actually have something to offer her that's meaningful enough to be useful to her and beneficial to her, and actually save her life in terms of the proximity you have to her, in terms of the life that she may end up leading in a way that offers her the same chance to have that same bounty to be able to pass on to somebody else who's similarly struggling. That's the service. That's the message. It isn't coming because you're going to finally get her straightened out. And that's insane.
I'm going to straighten your ass out, and I'm going to tell you how to do it. There's just a lot of rules attached to this human, like how to drive and how to open your car door and how to pick up a fucking cat and how to put the cat down.
And let's face it, Jana, you were a lot more fun when you were drinking.
There it is that.
I doubt it.
Oh my God. I was Irish Indian Banshee. I was not a fun fucking nigga. I was horrible.
I'm going to go to the beach and find Katie, and I love you guys, and I appreciate this very much. This was a good exploration today.
Thanks, guys. Good job, Jana. Thanks, Jana.
Yes, Jana, that was very, very good. John, thanks for also talking about what happened in Tokyo and being with us. And
thanks, John.
Bye, guys.
We love you, John.
Yes,
Take
lady.
care.
Okay.
Bye, everybody. Have fun. Tell Katie I said hi.
Kiss the baby.
Ciao.
Ciao.